Whispers in stone high in the Andes, where the air grows thin and time itself feels fragile, silent stones speak. Their voices are not heard in words, but in angles, precision, and impossible balance. From the walls of Sacsayhuaman to the terraces of Machu Picchu, each rock whispers a secret that modern science still struggles to decipher. How could the Incas, a people with no iron tools, no wheel, and no written language, have achieved such mastery over matter itself? The wind that sweeps across the sacred valley carries echoes of forgotten genius. It rustles through temples aligned perfectly with the solstice sun, through canals that still channel water with mathematical grace. Every mountain, every carved step, every smooth joint between stones seems to pulse with an intelligence that predates our own understanding of civilization. It is as if the earth itself once conspired with human hands to build a language beyond speech, a language of resonance, precision, and cosmic harmony. When the Spanish chroniclers first arrived, they saw these structures and assumed divine intervention. The devil must have helped them, one priest wrote. To those men steeped in the worldview of conquest, what they found here was incomprehensible. But the truth may be far older and far more extraordinary than they could imagine. For the Incas were not merely builders, they were observers of the universe, interpreters of light, masters of alignment. Their empire was not just a kingdom of gold, but of geometry. At dawn, when the first rays of sunlight strike the stones of Coricancha, the temple of the sun, a hidden pattern reveals itself. Shafts of light sliding perfectly across the walls, illuminating golden niches designed to capture celestial precision. Was this simply devotion to Inti, the sun god, or was it the visible proof of an ancient science, one that bound astronomy, architecture, and spirit into a single discipline? Imagine standing there, 500 years ago, as a priest of Inti begins his ritual. The city below awakens. The horizon burns with the first glow of the solstice sun, and in that instant, the line between faith and physics disappears. Every movement, every angle, every reflection is part of a vast design, not guessed, but calculated. The Incas read the heavens like a code, and their temples were instruments for decoding it. What if these stones were not merely built, but tuned? What if the Incas understood something that modern science is only now beginning to rediscover? That matter itself carries vibration, that energy moves through the earth like invisible music. Archaeologists have long admired the precision of Inca masonry, where blocks weighing dozens of tons fit so tightly together that not even a blade of grass can pass between them. Yet the question remains, how? Some say they shaped each stone by trial and error, guided only by patience. Others suspect heat, water, or even sonic resonance. But deeper still lies another possibility, that the Incas saw the world differently. To them, stone was not dead. It was alive, responsive, part of the same sacred continuum that united mountain, star, and man. Modern engineering can replicate their work, but not their mystery. To build as they did required not just technique, but vision, a way of perceiving geometry as something divine. Their architecture seems to defy the separation of science and spirituality. Each wall is an equation of faith, each terrace a statement of ecological balance, and yet we have only fragments. The conquistadors burned the codices, silenced the priests, erased the ceremonies. The songs that explain the stars were never written down, but the stones still remember. Their silence is not emptiness. It is encrypted knowledge, waiting to be read by those who still listen. Perhaps that is why Machu Picchu feels timeless. It was not built to dominate nature, but to speak with it. The city's terraces curve along the mountain, as if grown from the rock itself. Water flows endlessly through ancient channels, guided by gravity as if by intention. Each temple faces not chance, but celestial order, the sun, the stars, the shadow of the condor. The more we study, the more we realize how little we know. In a world obsessed with progress, we are humbled by an empire that understood something we forgot, that knowledge was never meant to conquer, but to connect. And as the fog rolls over the Andes, covering those silent walls once more, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The Incas did not build to last. They built to remember. But what exactly were they remembering? What if their architecture was not the beginning of a civilization, but the echo of one far older? And in that question lies the first crack in history's surface, a doorway to knowledge beyond time. Echoes of the Andes. The Andes are not just mountains. They are spines of gods, the vertebrae of a living earth. From Colombia to Chile, their peaks pierce the heavens like ancient antennas, connecting sky, stone, and spirit in a network of meaning the Incas once called Pachamama, Mother Earth, the living being that breathes beneath our feet. To the Inca mind, geography was never passive. Every ridge, valley, and shadow held intention. Their cities were not placed randomly, but woven into the fabric of the cosmos, like threads in a divine tapestry. Cusco, their capital, was the navel of the world, a sacred point where all directions met, the zero coordinate of an empire measured not by distance, but by energy. And when the Incas looked to the sky, they did not see emptiness. They saw reflection. The Milky Way was Mayu, the celestial river, mirroring the Urubamba below. The constellations were not formed by stars, but by the dark spaces between them, shapes of cosmic animals like the llama, the serpent, the toad, guardians of cycles and seasons. The sky and the earth were one continuous mirror, an infinite feedback loop of creation. To understand one, you had to study the other. This worldview was more than poetry. It was science disguised as reverence. By mapping the heavens, the Incas could measure time, predict weather, and align their cities with solar and lunar precision. The landscape itself became an astronomical instrument, a living calendar written across mountains and rivers. From Cusco, invisible lines known as seques radiated outward like spokes of a wheel, connecting hundreds of shrines called huacas. Each line corresponded to a day, a ritual, a celestial event. Together, they formed a calendar so precise that it synchronized agricultural cycles with the movements of the stars. To walk the seque lines was to move through both time and space. Each step carried meaning. Each shrine marked a mathematical point. This was not superstition. It was a form of scientific cartography, a spiritual geometry that united heaven's order with earth's fertility. Even the mountains themselves, the Apus, were conscious beings in Inca cosmology. These towering peaks were more than scenery. They were ancient watchers, sources of power and knowledge. Offerings were made not to appease them, but to maintain harmony with their forces. The Apus were teachers, not idols. Their alignment with stars and solstice suns dictated the rhythm of harvests, festivals, and even architecture. Imagine standing at the temple of Machu Picchu as the winter solstice dawns. The first light touches the sacred mountain of Huayna Picchu, then reflects onto the main altar. In that fleeting alignment, heaven and earth meet. To the priests of Inti, this was not mere coincidence. It was confirmation, the geometry of divinity proving itself through light. Modern instruments confirm what the ancients already knew. Many Inca sites align perfectly with astronomical events, but beyond mathematical brilliance, there is something else, something harder to define. A harmony, a resonance between human creation and natural form. The Incas did not impose order upon the world. They discovered the order already there and built within it. They were not architects of stone, but translators of nature's equations. Their perception of time was equally different. While Western civilizations drew time as a line, past behind, future ahead, the Incas saw it as a circle. The past was not gone. It stood before them, visible, alive. The future approached from behind, unseen. This worldview shaped everything: their agriculture, their governance, their science. Knowledge was not linear accumulation, but cyclical remembering. What had been discovered once could be rediscovered again, because truth was eternal. Perhaps that is why so much of their architecture seems timeless. Each temple, each road, each terrace feels less like a construction and more like a reactivation, as if they were rebuilding the remnants of something older, something that had already understood the patterns of earth and sky. Were the Incas inheritors rather than inventors? Did they preserve knowledge handed down from a civilization lost in prehistory, the same one whispered of in Andean legend as Viracocha's people, the children of the sun? Legends say that before the Inca Empire rose, a god with shining skin and eyes like lightning descended from Lake Titicaca. He taught the people how to build, how to farm, how to read the stars. When his work was done, he walked westward over the ocean and vanished into the sun. The Spaniards dismissed him as myth. But what if Viracocha was not a god, but a symbol of science, of forgotten mastery, of an older civilization erased by cataclysm and remembered only through ritual and design? Everywhere in the Andes, the same symbols appear: the sun disk, the serpent, the spiral. These are not decorations. They are data, encoded cosmology, repeated through centuries to preserve a system of knowledge too vast for words. The Incas may not have had writing, but they had memory architecture. Their temples, roads, and sightlines formed a physical database of cosmic information. When explorers map these sites today, they find that the alignments are not random. From Cusco to Tiwanaku, from Ollantaytambo to Machu Picchu, there runs a pattern, a geodesic order linking them like circuits on an ancient motherboard. Could this have been the real empire, not political, but energetic? A network designed to harmonize the land with the sky? In the modern world, we call this kind of thinking symbolic, mystical, or spiritual. But to the Incas, there was no distinction. Science was sacred. Observation was prayer. To build a temple was to calculate, and to calculate was to worship. When we begin to see the world through their eyes, the Andes transform. What seemed like mere rock becomes revelation. What looked like ruins becomes record. And somewhere in those echoes, in the wind between the stones, in the rhythm of water flowing through terraces older than memory, something stirs, waiting to be remembered again. Because in the Andes, nothing is ever truly forgotten. It only waits for the sun to rise, and when that light returns, it will illuminate not just the stones, but the science they once protected, the builders of light. There are places in the Andes where the sun does not merely shine, it speaks. At dawn and dusk, its rays thread through stone corridors, pierce narrow windows, and strike sacred altars with mathematical precision. To the Incas, this was no coincidence. It was conversation, light answering geometry. The empire of the sun was not built only in honor of Inti, their radiant god. It was engineered to interact with him. Their cities were not simply settlements, but solar instruments, designed to capture and measure the movements of the heavens. Each temple, each shadow, each reflection formed part of a celestial mechanism that turned silently with the seasons. Consider Coricancha, the temple of the sun in Cusco, once sheathed entirely in gold, so that it shimmered like a piece of the dawn itself. At the solstice, a single beam of light entered its sanctum, touching the golden disk that symbolized the heart of Inti. That alignment was not ornamental. It was data. It marked the exact turning point of the solar year, the moment when darkness began to recede or return. Coricancha was not a shrine. It was a solar observatory, coded in architecture. Even the streets of Cusco echoed this cosmic order. The city's design, radiating outward from the temple like rays from the sun, mirrored the sky above. Its walls, built from interlocking stones that seemed to breathe with the earth's pulse, formed resonant chambers for sound and light alike. At certain times of year when the sun reached its zenith, its light traced perfect lines across the walls, connecting Coricancha to the horizon's mountains. The Incas read those alignments the way we read equations, each ray of light, each shadowed angle, revealing information about the cosmos. This was not architecture for shelter, it was architecture for revelation. Travel further into the sacred valley and you find Ollantaytambo, a fortress that looks more like an observatory carved into the side of a mountain. 6 colossal monoliths stand in line at its temple wall, facing east. On the morning of the winter solstice, the first light of the rising sun passes through a natural cleft in the opposite mountain and strikes the center of those stones. The effect is breathtaking, as though the mountain itself projects a ray of light, a solar signal received by the temple. To modern engineers, this precision defies explanation. How could they have measured angles across miles of rugged terrain without instruments? How could they predict, with unerring accuracy, the movement of the sun through complex geography? The answer may lie not in their tools, but in their perception. The Incas observed the world with patience that modern science rarely allows. For generations, they watched how the light moved across the land, how shadows lengthened, how stars rose and fell behind specific peaks. Their instruments were not made of metal. They were the mountains themselves. Every horizon became a compass, every sunset a calculation, and perhaps that is why their constructions feel alive, because they were built with the land, not upon it. Where we might see random peaks, they saw markers in a grand celestial grid. The horizon was their laboratory, the sun, their clock. At Machu Picchu, this mastery reaches its purest form. High above the clouds, the city stands like a stone equation balanced perfectly between heaven and earth. Its temples are aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. The Intihuatana stone, often called the hitching post of the sun, was more than a monument. It was a precision instrument, a carved pointer designed to track the sun's shadow through the year. During equinox, the shadow nearly vanishes, a symbol that the sun was perfectly balanced, tethered to the world. Modern researchers have confirmed the astronomical accuracy of these alignments, but they still cannot explain how the Incas achieved it without telescopes, lenses, or compasses. It suggests something profound, that their understanding of astronomy was not merely observational but integrative. They didn't study the sky apart from the earth. They studied the relationship between them. In this relationship, light was both messenger and teacher. When the first beam of the solstice sun touched stone, it was a sign that time itself had turned. Farmers knew when to plant, priests knew when to offer, and the empire knew when to renew its covenant with the cosmos. Their calendar wasn't written on paper. It was written in shadow and reflection. In this way, the Incas anticipated the principles of solar engineering, using architecture to harness and interpret the movement of celestial bodies. But there was also something deeper, a philosophy that light was sacred because it revealed truth. To study light was to study the mind of creation itself. Many modern scientists describe the Inca approach as proto-astronomy, yet that term feels inadequate. What they practiced was not primitive at all. It was holistic, unifying physics, geometry, ecology, and spirituality into a single worldview. They didn't separate science from ceremony. Observation was devotion. Imagine again standing in Machu Picchu at dawn. The sky ignites in crimson and gold. A single beam of light slices between the stones of the Intihuatana. For a moment, it feels as if the mountain breathes, as if time itself pauses to acknowledge the alignment. To the Incas, this was not a spectacle. It was a confirmation of cosmic balance, proof that they still walked in harmony with the universe. And as the light shifts, spilling across terraces and altars, one begins to understand. They were not merely builders of stone, they were builders of light. But even as their sun temples mastered the sky, another mystery remains unsolved. How they worked the stones themselves with such impossible precision, because what they did with light is astonishing. astonishing, but what they did with matter may rewrite everything we think we know about ancient science. Beyond tools and hands, even among the ruins of empires, there are stones that seem to mock explanation. Blocks weighing more than 100 tons rest perfectly aligned, carved into complex shapes that lock together with surgical precision, without mortar, without iron, without even the hint of error. When you stand before them, it's easy to feel small. It's harder still to feel modern. Archaeologists call it polygonal masonry, but the term feels clinical, inadequate. To see it in person, to touch the cold, smooth face of a block that fits another as if poured into place, is to confront a mystery that words cannot contain. In Sacsayhuaman, the great fortress above Cusco, each wall seems alive, curving like muscle and bone. The stones interlock not as separate pieces, but as a single organism of granite and will. How did they do it? Traditional explanations claim a combination of stone hammers, chisels, and infinite patience. Yet, when tested in modern experiments, those methods fail to replicate the precision. Even with steel tools, cutting granite into such irregular shapes and matching them so tightly remains a formidable challenge. Some surfaces appear melted, as though the stone itself had softened, molded rather than carved. To this day, no one has found evidence of chiseling or the dust that such carving would leave behind. The stone surfaces are too clean, too perfect, too deliberate. The Incas themselves offered no written record, no blueprint, but their legends whisper of sound and light, of sacred songs that could move mountains. In the ancient Quechua language, the word kusikui means to vibrate with joy. It appears in myths describing priests who used song and rhythm to awaken the stones. Could this be metaphor or memory? Some researchers, both academic and fringe, have begun exploring the idea of acoustic technology, that vibration and resonance may have played a role in shaping or transporting these massive blocks. After all, modern science has demonstrated that certain frequencies can alter matter. Sound waves can lift small objects, even move particles through the air. On a small scale, it is physics. On a grand scale, could it have been lost knowledge? Imagine a group of Inca priests standing before an unfinished wall, their instruments, drums, flutes, conch shells, tuned not for music but for frequency. They chant, the air hums, the ground trembles ever so slightly, and in that vibration the stones become pliable, alive, responsive. Fantasy? Perhaps. But then again, so is much of what we take for granted today. Even mainstream archaeologists admit that the methods used by the Incas remain speculative. The quarries often lie miles away, separated by ravines and rivers. Without wheels or beasts of burden capable of hauling such weight, how were the stones transported? Some paths rise at nearly impossible angles. The terrain itself rebels against explanation. In Ollantaytambo, the pink granite blocks at the Temple of the Sun weigh up to 60 tons each. They were quarried across the valley 3,000 feet higher. To move them, one would have to cross a river and ascend steep slopes, a task that would challenge modern cranes. Yet the stones are there, immovable, perfectly placed. It's as if the Incas understood the mountain's rhythm, not fighting gravity but collaborating with it. Their paths and ramps follow natural contours, as though they listened to the land before moving its bones. The Spanish chroniclers were baffled. Pedro Cieza de Leon wrote in the 1500s that the natives spoke of a liquid used to soften stone. Others mentioned a song of the builders that guided the placement of blocks. These reports were dismissed as myth, and yet they persist. In 1996, a Peruvian engineer named Alfredo Gamarra proposed that the Incas may have known how to temporarily alter the molecular structure of stone using natural acids and vibration. He pointed to the glossy surfaces of certain blocks, their soft, almost clay-like curves, as evidence of a lost chemical process. Others believe the real secret lies in magnetism, that some stones were chosen for their mineral composition, forming an energy circuit when aligned with geomagnetic fields. skeptics wave these ideas away. But as centuries pass, the mystery only deepens. For no one, not even with modern tools, has perfectly replicated the Inca style on the same monumental scale. Perhaps the real secret is not technological at all, but perceptual. The Incas saw the world not as dead matter, but as living form. They worked with stone as one would with a living partner, listening for balance, harmony, and resonance. Their walls were not obstacles but collaborations, conversations between human intention and the Earth's natural geometry. In this sense, their engineering becomes inseparable from their spirituality. To move stone was not to dominate nature, but to engage in ritual, to align human will with cosmic rhythm. That unity, that vibration between mind and matter, may have been their true technology. When we study their walls today, measuring every joint, analyzing every angle, we are looking for physics. But maybe we should be listening for music, because beneath the geometry, there is melody, a rhythm carved into silence, a pattern that defies decay. Even now, when the wind moves through the narrow streets of Cusco, it hums softly between those ancient joints, as if the stones still remember the songs that shaped them, and perhaps they do. For if the Incas could make stone obey, it was not through force, but through understanding, through knowledge that reached beyond tools and hands, into the unseen harmonies of the earth itself. But this mastery of matter was only one half of their forgotten science. For while their stones captured the power of the earth, their eyes captured the movements of the heavens. And when the two met, sky and stone, light and gravity, a new kind of knowledge was born. The sky as a clock. To the Incas, the sky was not infinite, it was structured. Every sunrise, every shifting constellation, every wandering star was part of a living system, a cosmic mechanism of balance and renewal. Where modern civilization builds machines to measure time, the Incas looked upward and found a clock already ticking above them. The heavens were their calendar, and the sun was their heartbeat. Across the empire, from the deserts of Nazca to the frozen plateaus of Lake Titicaca, they built observatories not with metal or glass, but with stone and patience. Their instruments were walls, towers, and carved sightlines aligned with the movements of the heavens. With nothing more than shadow and memory, they measured time so precisely that their agricultural cycles rarely failed. For them, astronomy was survival, and also revelation. The cosmos was both a textbook and a temple. One of the earliest Inca observatories still stands near Cusco, Intihuatana, the place where the sun is tied. To the untrained eye, it looks like a simple carved pillar. But at specific moments of the year, the shadows cast by its edges mark exact solar positions, the solstices and equinoxes that governed the rhythm of the empire. During the winter solstice, when the days were shortest and darkness longest, priests performed the Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun. They believed that if the ceremony was done precisely, if the music, the chants, the sacrifices, and the alignments were perfect, then the priests could tie the sun to the earth once more, ensuring its return. But behind that ritual was careful calculation, an understanding of solar cycles that rivaled contemporary European astronomy. At sites like Machu Picchu, Cusco, and Pisac, these solar alignments were not symbolic. They were empirical. Shadows fell exactly where they were meant to, confirming the passage of time not by abstraction, but by observation. The entire empire breathed in sync with the sun's path, planting, harvesting, fasting, and celebrating in rhythm with cosmic law. Their word for this rhythm was pacha, meaning both time and space, a single concept that fused geometry with duration. To the Inca mind, time was not something that passed through space. Time was space. Every movement of a star or planet echoed through the land, and every temple mirrored that motion. The earth and the sky were synchronized, one vast, breathing organism. It's no coincidence that the empire stretched across every ecological zone of the Andes, From the coastal deserts to the mountain peaks, the Incas cultivated crops suited to each altitude, each microclimate, and they timed every agricultural act with astronomical precision. The solar calendar determined when to plant maize in the valleys, potatoes on the slopes, quinoa at the high altitudes. When the stars of the Pleiades vanished in early May, a natural event caused by their proximity to the sun, it warned of coming weather. If the cluster reappeared bright and clear, the year would be good. If dim or scattered, famine might follow. Modern climatologists have confirmed the scientific basis of that observation. The brightness of the Pleiades does, in fact, correlate with atmospheric humidity patterns linked to El Niño events. In other words, the Incas had developed empirical meteorology centuries before the invention of barometers or telescopes. Their instruments were the horizon, the stars, and memory itself. And unlike the mechanical clocks of the West, their sky clock was not about minutes and seconds. It was about relationship, the dance between light and shadow, fertility and decay, sun and moon. Their measurements were not to control nature, but to live within its pulse. At Chanquillo, an ancient site predating the Inca Empire but later revered by their astronomer priests, 13 stone towers stand along a ridge. Each marks the sunrise's position throughout the year, from solstice to solstice, effectively forming the world's oldest solar observatory. The Incas inherited this sacred science and perfected it. Their empire became a vast observatory, every mountain peak, every horizon line, a fixed point in the great celestial equation. To them, the sky was a teacher. The sun told them when to act. The moon told them when to rest. The stars told them when the rains would come. Their science was encoded in ceremony, but make no mistake, it was science. The difference was that the Incas saw no boundary between knowledge and faith. Each observation was a prayer, each calculation an act of devotion. It is easy for us, with our satellites and atomic clocks, to underestimate such wisdom. Yet when NASA compared ancient Andean calendars with modern astronomical data, they found that many alignments, particularly those marking the solstices, were accurate to within a single day. No computers, no optics, just centuries of patient observation and reverence for the sky. The Incas lived in time, not against it. They didn't measure the universe, they synchronized with it. This harmony was not accidental. It was cultivated through education. The priest-scientists, known as amautas, trained for decades to master the interplay of mathematics, astronomy, and spirituality. They memorized cycles of the sun and moon, the rising of Venus, and the precession of constellations. Their temples were their textbooks. The night sky was their blackboard, and each dawn was a new lesson in the eternal mathematics of creation. Perhaps the greatest irony is that we rediscover their precision only now, in an age when we have forgotten to look up. For the Incas, time was not mechanical. It was alive. The sky was not a void, but a pulse. And every morning, when the first light touched the stones of Coricancha or traced the edges of Machu Picchu, they saw not just the return of the sun, but the renewal of knowledge itself. Because for them, light was more than illumination. It was information. But their understanding of the heavens went even further. For in the heart of their empire, they built a city designed not just beneath the sky, but with it. And that city, Cusco, would become the living clock of the Andes. Cusco, the living observatory. In the thin air of the Andes, where the horizon burns gold at dawn, there lies a city whose design still confounds modern architects. Cusco, the ancient capital of Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, was not built as a city in the ordinary sense. It was built as a mirror of the heavens. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they saw narrow streets and towering walls of interlocked stone. But beneath the surface of what they conquered was a geometry so intricate that it could only have been drawn by minds who thought in both stars and seasons. To the Incas, Cusco was not merely the seat of power, it was the axis of the universe. Every direction, every path, every river and temple flowed outward from it like veins of a living body. The very name Cusco means navel or center, and the city was conceived as a cosmic organism. Its plan, viewed from above, resembles a puma, the sacred feline of strength and guardianship. The Sacsayhuaman fortress formed the animal's head. The Huatanay River traced its spine. The Coricancha temple glimmered at the heart, like a golden heart pumping divine energy through stone arteries. This was not coincidence. It was cosmology made concrete. From the Coricancha, lines of spiritual and astronomical significance, called seques, radiated outward into the surrounding landscape. There were 41 of them, each dotted with shrines known as huacas, more than 350 in total. These were not random sacred spots, but precise markers aligned with solar, lunar, and stellar positions. To walk these lines was to traverse both geography and time. Every shrine corresponded to a festival, a celestial event, or a seasonal turning point. The SEC system transformed the entire valley into an interactive calendar, linking human ritual with the pulse of the cosmos. Imagine the empire's astronomer priests standing atop Coricancha during solstice. As the sun rose over the mountains, light would pour into the temple, travel along the gold-lined walls, and finally strike an altar where the emperor, the Sapa Inca, son of the sun, awaited the first beam. That light was more than illumination. It was communication. It confirmed the balance between heaven and earth, between divine order and human duty. But what if the entire city itself was built as an observatory? Modern satellite imagery and archaeological mapping suggest that the layout of Cusco is not random at all. Major temples, plazas, and pathways align with key astronomical directions. Solstitial sunrises, lunar standstills, and the rising points of specific constellations like the Pleiades. The placement of Coricancha relative to Sacsayhuaman and other sacred hills forms geometric alignments that may have served as horizon markers, an urban-scale clock ticking with celestial rhythm. This suggests that the Incas practiced not just astronomy but astro-architecture, the integration of cosmic data into city planning itself. Cusco, in this sense, was not a city built beneath the sky. It was the sky, translated into stone. Its streets traced celestial pathways, its plazas mirrored constellations, and its temples anchored the movement of the heavens to the body of the earth. The idea of the world as a living system was central to Inca science. They spoke of Hanan Pacha, the upper world, the realm of the stars, Ke Pacha, the world of the living, and Uku Pacha, the inner world of roots, caves, and the dead. Cusco was the meeting point of all three, a physical portal where the energy of the cosmos flowed into the material world. Every ritual, every construction, every festival aimed to maintain that delicate equilibrium. To disrupt it was to invite chaos. Even the city's water system followed sacred geometry. Channels ran through streets and courtyards with astonishing hydraulic precision, feeding fountains and ritual baths that reflected the sunlight like miniature mirrors of the heavens. At certain times of day, these reflections aligned with the temple's golden interiors, amplifying light in ways that were both aesthetic and astronomical. In the language of the Amautas, the philosopher-scientists of the Andes, water was the mirror of Inti, the sun's double. Its movement through the city symbolized not just purity, but transmission, the flow of cosmic energy into the veins of the empire. The emperor himself was both ruler and mediator of this energy. As the living embodiment of the sun, the Sapa Inca presided over rituals that synchronized the human world with the celestial one. His throne faced the rising sun. His crown bore golden rays that symbolized Inti's presence made flesh. When he spoke from the Coricancha, it was as if the light itself had found a voice. Yet beneath the grandeur, there was precision. Priests charted the stars from Cusco's sight lines, tracking the lunar cycle and solar zenith to determine the exact timing of harvests and rituals. Every ceremony was data, every offering a record of cosmic behavior. The city functioned like a living computer, input, observation, and calibration through ritual and design. Today, the city still breathes that order, though buried beneath colonial plazas and modern walls. The Spanish replaced temples with churches, melted the gold, and built cathedrals atop Inca foundations. Yet the alignments remain. The sun still rises over the same peaks, casting the same shadows where once stood the altars of Inti. The science encoded in the stones cannot be erased. It merely sleeps beneath the footsteps of modern Cusco. Perhaps that is the true genius of the Incas. They didn't build for eternity. They built for recurrence. They knew that civilizations rise and fall, but the sky remains. So they wrote their knowledge into the one thing no empire could conquer, the geometry of light itself. When you stand at Coricancha at dawn and the first sunbeam cuts across the ancient stones, you are witnessing the same moment the priests saw 600 years ago. The alignment is perfect. The dialogue continues. The city still speaks. Cusco was, and still is, a living observatory, a bridge between the human and the divine, between the measurable and the mystical. And yet, even this celestial city was only part of something larger, a network of temples and observatories that extended across the empire, all tuned to the same solar rhythm. For while Cusco served as the heart, its eyes were scattered across the Andes, towers of stone that watched the sun itself move through time. And those eyes still gaze skyward, waiting for us to remember what they once saw, the eyes of the sun. In the quiet hours before dawn, the Andes hold their breath. A faint line of gold appears over the horizon, and suddenly the mountains awaken. For the Incas, this moment was not just the start of a new day. It was an act of communication. The sun was speaking, and they were listening through instruments of stone. They called them Inti Watana, the places where the sun is tied. To modern eyes, they appear as carved pillars, enigmatic stones rising from terraces and temple courtyards. But to the Inca astronomer priests, they were far more. Precision tools for measuring the sky, sacred anchors that held the rhythm of the cosmos in place. The word Inti means sun, the supreme deity, the giver of life. Watana means to tie or to tether. Together, the phrase carries a profound idea that the sun, the great wanderer of the heavens, could be bound to the earth through geometry and intention. These stones, carved with angles and planes aligned to celestial positions, marked the solstices and equinoxes with astonishing accuracy. At Machu Picchu, the most famous Intihuatana still stands on a high terrace overlooking the Urubamba River. When the winter solstice sun reaches its lowest arc, its rays strike the top of the pillar at a perfect angle, casting a shadow that disappears for only a moment, the instant when the sun is tied, balanced, and reborn. To the priests of the sun, this was the cosmic hinge upon which the year turned. To miss that moment would be to fall out of harmony with creation itself. But the Incas built more than one. Across the empire, from Cusco to Pisac to Ollantaytambo, similar stones and towers stand, aligned with the same celestial logic. Together they formed a network, a system of solar observation that connected the Andes from north to south. Each site was like an eye, fixed upon a different part of the sky, yet all working in concert to track the same luminous cycle. It was as if the empire itself had become a living observatory, the entire land gazing upward through 1,000 stone pupils. The torreones of Machu Picchu, curved windowed towers of perfectly cut stone, functioned as solar sightlines. Through narrow openings, priests watched the sunrise during solstice and equinox. When the light passed exactly through those apertures and illuminated the sacred altar within, it was the signal. Time had turned. The ceremonies could begin. Crops could be planted or harvested. The empire could move with the universe once again. What makes these structures extraordinary is not merely their precision, but their philosophy. The Incas were not measuring the sky for curiosity's sake. They were maintaining reciprocity, a balance they called Aini, between the human and the cosmic. To track the sun was to fulfill an obligation, to ensure that light and life remained in equilibrium. This sense of duty transformed observation into ritual. Each measurement was accompanied by offerings, maize beer, coca leaves, feathers, and even precious metals, given to the earth and the heavens alike. In their worldview, knowledge required gratitude. Science and spirituality were not separate paths. They were two halves of the same circle. The Spanish chroniclers, unable to grasp the purpose of such structures, often called them idols. They could not imagine that the Incas used these stones to perform calculations. Yet the accuracy of the Intihuatana rivals that of early European observatories. The angles, the carved planes, the sight lines, all correspond to the sun's declination and altitude with mathematical precision. At Pisac, a lesser-known site northeast of Cusco, the Intihuatana stone is set atop a ridge where the surrounding mountains form natural horizon markers. As the sun moves through the year, its rays trace lines along these peaks, creating a living diagram of time. From one vantage point, the silhouette of the mountain aligns perfectly with the shadow cast by the pillar, a moment the priests interpreted as the sun touching the earth. It was a moment of renewal, of cosmic embrace. Some researchers believe these alignments may also have served as agricultural calendars, predicting not only seasons, but rainfall and temperature fluctuations. The Incas observed how the sun's path influenced microclimates, and they adapted their crops accordingly. This was not mysticism. It was environmental engineering guided by celestial observation. But the mystery of the Intihuatana goes deeper still. Many of these stones show magnetic anomalies, subtle variations in the Earth's field, detectable even today. Some explorers suggest that the Incas chose locations with natural energy concentrations, amplifying their connection between sky and ground. Whether intentional or coincidental, the fact remains. The Intihuatana often stands where the lines of earth and heaven converge most strongly. What if these stones were not merely astronomical markers, but nodes in an energetic network, points where the Incas harnessed the Earth's own frequencies? It would explain why they considered such places sacred, why they described the stones as alive, capable of drinking the light of the sun. To touch an Intihuatana at the right moment, they said, was to touch time itself. The Spanish feared these stones. They believed them to be instruments of sorcery. Many were destroyed, their alignments lost. Yet the few that remain continue to defy the centuries, untouched by earthquakes that leveled entire cities. The Inca Masons had discovered something more than balance. They had discovered resonance. Their stones were tuned to the earth, absorbing and dissipating the planet's energy like vast tuning forks of granite. To this day, travelers who visit Machu Picchu at dawn speak of a sensation difficult to name, a hum beneath the silence, a warmth rising from the stone as sunlight touches it. Perhaps it is imagination, or perhaps, after all these centuries, the stones are still listening. The eyes of the sun were not just monuments. They were instruments and messages. Each one whispered a simple truth, that knowledge and reverence are one and the same. And as the last light of day passes over the terraces of Machu Picchu, the shadow of the Intihuatana stretches across the stone, marking the eternal rhythm once more. For the Incas, this was the heartbeat of the universe, a pulse of light that reminded them who they were and where they stood in the great order of things. But the Incas also studied the darkness between those rays, the play of shadow itself, and from that they extracted another kind of science, one even more mysterious, because to measure the sun, one must first understand its opposite, the geometry of shadow, the language of shadows. To the Inca, light alone was not enough to understand the universe, for where there is light there must also be shadow, and within that contrast lies the rhythm of creation itself. The Spanish chroniclers wrote endlessly about the worship of Inti, the sun, but they missed the deeper truth. The Incas did not revere the sun alone. They honored the balance, the eternal dialogue between illumination and darkness. The sun revealed, but the shadow measured. Their greatest instruments did not shine. they darkened. In every major Inca site, from Machu Picchu to Cusco to Pisac, the play of shadow was engineered with astonishing intention. During solstices and equinoxes, lines of darkness glide across the walls, floors, and altars like the hands of a celestial clock. At specific moments, those shadows vanish or merge perfectly with carved markings, signaling the exact midpoint of a solar or lunar cycle. The priests called this moment Pachacuti, the world reversal, when time itself turns over and a new cosmic season begins. In Coricancha, the temple of the sun, the Incas used thin slits and angled niches to capture sunlight in precise intervals. As the day advanced, beams of light and streaks of shadow shifted along gold-lined walls, creating a dynamic calendar of geometry. The temple's architects didn't simply let light in, they sculpted it. They understood that by controlling the angle and depth of openings, they could predict the exact moment of celestial transitions. In this way, shadow became a tool of prophecy, not mystical, but empirical. The priests observed, recorded, compared. Over generations, they refined their alignments until every ceremony occurred at the moment when heaven and earth were in perfect synchrony. But the science of shadow extended far beyond the temple walls. The very landscape of the Andes became a projection surface, a living screen upon which the gods wrote in light and darkness. Mountains and valleys formed natural sundials. Their ridges caught or concealed the sun depending on the season. From Cusco, priests watched how light traced specific peaks at dawn and dusk, using those alignments to forecast agricultural cycles. They even gave these peaks names, not just for worship, but for measurement. Each mountain, each shadow, each sunrise was a line in the great celestial equation. At Machu Picchu, the Temple of the Three Windows perfectly frames the sunrise during solstice. The light enters, splits, and throws three parallel beams across the floor, a symbolic trinity of creation, duality, and renewal. When the light disappears, the shadow left behind aligns with carvings etched centuries earlier, marking time with the accuracy of a clock. But what the Incas discovered went beyond timing. They realized that shadow could reveal form, not just physical, but spiritual. To them, the shifting silhouette of a mountain, the elongation of a stone's shadow, even the dark shapes in the Milky Way were messages. In the Andean sky, constellations were not made of stars, but of darkness. Modern astronomers see constellations as points of light, the cross, the hunter, the bear. But the Incas saw something deeper. In the black clouds between the stars of the Milky Way, they discerned animals, the llama, the serpent, the toad, the fox, cosmic beings that moved with the seasons and mirrored life on Earth. Their dark constellations were living indicators of time and fertility. When the dark shape of the llama rose above the horizon, the birthing season for real llamas began. When the serpent appeared, rains would follow. This was empirical observation wrapped in myth, a celestial ecology uniting astronomy and biology in one system of meaning. It was as if the Incas saw negative space as the true blueprint of reality. Where we look for brightness, they looked for balance. The architecture of their temples reflects this philosophy. Every window, every passage, every angled wall creates an interplay between shadow and form. As the sun moves, shadows crawl across carvings and altars, transforming static stone into a living diagram. At certain hours, shapes emerge that cannot be seen at any other time. Jaguars, serpents, and condors materializing from darkness, as if summoned by light itself. These were not coincidences of design, they were manifestations of intention. To the Inca, a temple was not complete until its shadows spoke. Some modern architects and physicists who have studied these patterns suggest that the Incas may have used sunlight and shadow as optical data, tracking not only time, but solar declination and latitude. The recurring patterns could have been used to correct for drift in agricultural timing or to calibrate their lunar cycles with the solar year. In other words, their shadow temples were both observatories and laboratories. But shadow had another meaning. one of spirit. In Andean thought, everything that exists casts a shadow, and that shadow is a reflection of its essence, its kamek, or life force. When the priests performed rituals in the temples, they aligned their bodies and objects so that the shadows merged with sacred carvings, symbolically merging their spirits with divine forms. In those moments, they believed the boundary between the visible and the invisible dissolved. Perhaps that is why their science feels so elusive to us today. They did not separate physical truth from spiritual resonance. The movement of light and shadow was not just an astronomical event, it was a sacred conversation. And yet within that conversation lies a universal principle, one that modern physics recognizes too, that energy reveals itself through contrast. The Inca may not have had telescopes, but they understood relativity, that to measure the sun, one must first measure its absence. Their world was not divided into opposites, but woven from dualities, day and night, life and death, male and female, earth and sky, all reflections of one another. To understand one side was to know the other, and in that equilibrium lay power. The language of shadows was the silent science of the Incas, an ancient form of optics and philosophy that saw darkness not as void, but as information. Today, as we analyze their temples with lasers and drones, we begin to see what they always knew, that the world is written not only in light, but in the patterns light leaves behind. And through that language, etched in stone and shadow, they spoke to the sun itself. But this harmony between heaven and earth was not limited to light. It extended to the very geometry of the land, where every mountain, river, and terrace was part of a grander equation. For the Incas, the earth itself was a diagram, and its proportions were the key to power, the geometry of power. The Incas believed that harmony was not an idea. It was a measurement. Everything in existence, from the curve of a mountain to the orbit of a star, followed patterns of proportion and resonance. To live in balance was to live within that geometry, a sacred architecture that extended from the smallest seed to the vast arc of the heavens. Their empire was not ruled only by kings or warriors, but by form. The Inca word kame meant to infuse with life, and it was said that form itself, the arrangement of things, carried kame. In other words, geometry was alive. When you walk through the ruins of Machu Picchu or Ollantaytambo, you sense it instinctively. The lines are not arbitrary. The angles are not random. Every wall leans slightly inward. Every terrace follows the mountain's contour. Every temple aligns with a horizon or a celestial event. The city feels not built upon the mountain, but grown from it, as though it sprouted from the rock itself. To the Incas, this was not artistry. It was science, a living mathematics. Modern architects have noted that many Inca structures conform to geometric ratios remarkably similar to those found in nature, the same ratios that define the spiral of a shell, the branching of a fern, or the orbit of planets. Some alignments and measurements approach what modern mathematics calls the golden ratio, though the Incas would never have used such a term. For them, these numbers were not abstract. They were sacred expressions of Aini, the principle of reciprocity that bound all things. The temples of the sun, the moon, and the stars were designed according to these ratios, echoing natural symmetry. Even their stairways and windows follow patterns of proportional ascent, small to large, narrow to wide, mirroring the expanding motion of growth. The effect is subtle but powerful. When you stand inside such spaces, you feel equilibrium, as if the architecture itself breathes with you. The Incas called this sense of balance sumak kause, the good life, or more literally, beautiful existence. It was not wealth or comfort, but alignment, physical, moral, and cosmic. They believed that by aligning human constructions with the geometry of nature, they maintained the health of the world itself. But this harmony was not accidental. It was engineered. Every major Inca site was placed within a web of relationships, to mountains, to rivers, to the stars above. The same angles repeat from site to site, as if echoing a blueprint drawn on a planetary scale. Modern mapping reveals a surprising pattern. pattern. Many temples and fortresses align along straight geodesic lines, stretching hundreds of miles, forming a network that corresponds roughly with astronomical directions and the Earth's magnetic flow. Coincidence? Or evidence that the Incas understood something we have only recently rediscovered, that the planet itself has geometry. In Quechua tradition, the world was divided into 4 quarters, or suyus, radiating from Cusco. Each suyu represented not only territory but orientation, north, south, east, and west, and each had symbolic color, animal, and element. These were not mere divisions of land, they were axes of energy. Cusco was the intersection point, the zero node where these forces converged. The Inca Empire, Tawantinsuyu, literally meant the land of the 4 parts together. It was not just political unity, it was geometric unity, the empire as mandala. The layout of temples within Cusco reinforces this pattern. Coricancha, the central temple, contained 5 main chambers representing celestial bodies: the sun, the moon, the stars, lightning, and the rainbow. Each chamber was aligned with specific directions, linking heaven, earth, and the underworld through measured angles. These weren't decorative alignments, they were harmonic calibrations, maintaining the balance between the elements and the energies of the land. Inca engineers achieved this precision without compasses or written plans. Their tools were cords, stakes, and observation, and perhaps something more intuitive, an understanding of resonance. They spoke of samak kausai, the breath of the earth, a subtle vibration that could be felt through the feet, the hands, and even the stones themselves. Builders were trained to sense this pulse and align their work accordingly. When the resonance felt right, the structure was considered alive, in harmony with the world's frequency. Modern seismologists have found that many Inca buildings, especially those in Cusco and Machu Picchu, exhibit extraordinary earthquake resistance. Their trapezoidal doors and inward-leaning walls distribute stress so efficiently that they've withstood centuries of quakes that destroyed newer colonial structures above them. The Incas, it seems, understood not only geometry, but physics, the geometry of motion. Their temples didn't resist the earth's tremors. They moved with them. It's a lesson in humility and in intelligence. To build in harmony is to build for eternity. Perhaps this is why their monuments feel alive. When the sun passes across their walls, light and shadow trace proportions that seem deliberate, as if the buildings themselves are performing an equation in real time. To walk among them is to feel the presence of invisible mathematics, a music of form. One could say the Incas practiced a kind of architectural tuning. They aligned stone, water, and air into resonance, creating spaces that felt charged, vibrant, balanced. Some visitors even report sensations of calm or vibration within these temples, phenomena that modern acoustics has begun to measure. In certain Inca chambers, the frequency of a human voice resonates perfectly with the cavity, amplifying sound like a harmonic amplifier. Geometry as power, literally. Their mastery of proportion extended to agriculture as well. The spacing of terraces, the slope of irrigation canals, the distance between ceremonial stones, all adhere to harmonic ratios. Their geometry fed not only the spirit, but the body. In the end, this was the essence of their science, the realization that the universe is not random but ordered, and that by aligning oneself with that order, one participates in creation. To live geometrically was to live truthfully. And when you stand before those ancient walls, so silent, so perfect, you begin to understand. The Incas didn't just measure the world, they remembered its pattern. They built not to display power, but to embody it, the power of proportion, of alignment, of resonance. But geometry, for the Incas, was not only structure, it was vibration, because behind every line there is a tone, and behind every stone a sound waiting to be heard. And in that sound lay the next secret of their forgotten science: resonant stone. There are places in the Andes where a whisper doesn't fade, it multiplies. Speak softly inside certain Inca chambers, and your words return as harmonic echoes, spiraling around you like invisible music. The stones seem to respond, to hum, as if alive. To modern visitors, it feels like magic, but to the Incas, it was engineering. They understood something we are only beginning to rediscover: that the universe does not merely exist in silence, but vibrates. That every object, every mountain, every drop of water has a frequency, and that to understand reality, one must listen to its tone. The Incas built with this awareness. Their stones were not inert, they were instruments. Archaeologists studying the temples of Cusco and Ollantaytambo have recorded curious acoustic phenomena: claps that echo in patterns, footsteps that produce distinct tones, even humming frequencies that correspond to the shape of the chamber. The Temple of the Condor, for example, produces a deep resonance that mirrors the low frequency of the condor's own cry. The Temple of the Moon, carved into living rock, vibrates with a soft, sustained hum when certain notes are sung within. Coincidence? Perhaps not. Recent studies in archaeoacoustics, the science of ancient sound, reveal that many Inca sites were designed to amplify or modulate resonance. Stone walls curve inward to focus sound waves. Cavities beneath altars act as amplifiers. Even staircases double as harmonic reflectors. It is as though the entire architecture were tuned. But tuned to what? The Incas described a principle called Sonko Nawi, the eye of the heart. It was said that true perception did not come from sight, but from vibration. The priests and amautas believed that every stone, every stream, every wind carried a frequency of kamak, the life force, and that by harmonizing with it through chant or sound, one could commune with the living earth. This was not mysticism to them. It was the most natural science imaginable. They knew that vibration was creation. When they built temples, they listened to the hum of the rock before carving. The right place to cut, they said, was where the stones sang back. The fortress of Sacsayhuaman demonstrates this perfectly. Its immense walls, made of interlocking polygons, create acoustic corridors where sound travels unnaturally far. A voice whispered at one end can be heard clearly 100 feet away. The stones seem to carry it, guiding the vibration along their joints. Some engineers now suspect that the specific angles of these joints, so famous for their perfection, were not only for stability, but for resonance. They distribute sound as efficiently as they do stress. If true, this means the Incas designed acoustic architecture centuries before the first modern concert hall. But the purpose was not entertainment, it was transformation. Sound was a bridge between the physical and the spiritual. Ritual music, flutes, drums, conch shells, and chanting was used to tune temples before ceremonies, aligning the vibrations of the space with those of the participants. When the frequency matched, they said, the veil between worlds thinned. Some accounts from the Quechua oral tradition speak of singing stones that would tremble or shift during certain rituals. The Spanish chroniclers dismissed such stories as myth, yet experiments with resonance today show that low-frequency sound can indeed cause heavy objects to vibrate. Was this how the Incas once moved their stones? Not through brute force, but through harmony? It is easy to scoff until you stand in those places and hear it. At Ollantaytambo, the 6 massive monoliths of the Temple of the Sun seem to hum faintly under the midday heat. When the wind passes through the narrow corridors between them, it produces a low, flute-like tone, steady, clear, haunting. The sound is strongest during the solstice, when sunlight hits the stones directly. Ancient witnesses said the sun sang to its temple. Perhaps they were more literal than we think. Even the quarries where these stones were cut appear to have been chosen for their acoustic properties. Certain veins of granite and andesite carry resonance better than others, producing a ringing tone when struck. The builders may have tested each block's voice before selection, ensuring that the structure as a whole vibrated in harmony. Each temple, then, was a composition, a symphony of frequencies frozen in stone. Modern physicists might call this structural resonance. The Incas called it life. It's telling that many of their most sacred symbols, the spiral, the wave, the condor's wings, represent motion and vibration. The spiral, carved into countless stones, is not just decoration. It is the shape of sound itself, the geometry of resonance, the pattern that vibration makes as it moves through space. Their entire cosmology reflected this principle. Creation, according to Andean myth, began with a sound, the breath of Viracocha, the first vibration that gave shape to matter. The temples, the chants, the rituals, all were echoes of that primal frequency. To speak, to sing, to build, was to participate in the act of creation anew. There's another detail, subtle but telling. In many Inca temples, niches and doorways are trapezoidal, slanting inward. This is not just for seismic resistance. Trapezoidal openings alter sound, focusing and amplifying it like the mouth of a horn. When a conch shell trumpet is played near such an opening, the entire structure vibrates, and a deep harmonic pulse fills the chamber. Those who have experienced it describe the sensation as physical, as if the sound passes through the body. The Inca priests called this state tinku, union. It was both acoustic and spiritual resonance, the meeting point of frequencies. Perhaps that is what modern science is rediscovering under new names: resonance, coherence, quantum vibration. To the Incas, these were not theories. They were truths as obvious as sunrise. The world was sound, and stone was its memory. In the hush that follows the wind across Machu Picchu, if you stand still enough, you can almost hear it. The low murmur beneath the silence, the same tone that guided builders, priests, and astronomers centuries ago. It is the heartbeat of the Andes, still vibrating through the granite, still alive. For the Incas, sound was not just communication, it was construction, it was connection, it was consciousness made audible. And when they shaped their world through resonance, they created something more than architecture. They created a song that never ended. But this symphony of stone did not stop at temples or fortresses. It flowed through rivers, terraces, and canals, for the Incas extended their mastery of vibration into the lifeblood of their empire, water. And through the movement of water, they learned to control the energy of the earth itself. The sacred flow. In the high Andes, water is a miracle. It trickles from the snowcaps like the breath of the gods, vanishing into crevices and reappearing miles below as streams, springs, and silver ribbons of life. To the Incas, these rivers were not accidents of geography. They were veins of the world, carrying the pulse of Pachamama, the living earth. And to guide their flow was to speak directly to her heart. Nowhere on earth did ancient engineers treat water with such reverence or such mastery. The Incas built canals and fountains that still function after 500 years, untouched by rust, untouched by time. These were not mere utilities. They were ceremonies of flow, designed to merge science, spirit, and sustainability into a single act of creation. At Tipón, south of Cusco, this fusion reaches perfection. The entire mountainside is a hydraulic laboratory disguised as a temple. Stone channels carry water down from the heights, dividing and recombining in perfect symmetry. Terraces form stepped amphitheaters of green, irrigated by invisible veins running beneath the soil. In the center stands a fountain so precise that its water splits into 4 identical streams, falling at exactly the same height and speed. Not one drop is wasted. To modern engineers, this is astonishing. To the Incas, it was sacred geometry in motion, a living mandala of balance. The 4 streams represented the 4 suyus of the empire, meeting in harmony at the center. The Tawantinsuyu, the 4 parts together. Through the dance of water, they reenacted cosmic unity. Hydraulic experts who have studied Tipón marvel at the mathematical exactness of the system. The gradient of each channel is calibrated to maintain constant pressure, preventing erosion while ensuring continuous flow, a feat that would challenge modern civil engineers even today. The angles of descent, the curvature of the channels, the placement of each stone, all align with the slope of the mountain and the position of the sun. Every element, from geometry to gravity, was woven into a single, self-sustaining equation. And yet, there is poetry in its precision. When sunlight strikes the fountains at dawn, the streams shimmer like liquid glass, reflecting the golden glow of Inti. The sound of flowing water fills the terraces with a soft, rhythmic pulse. Not noise, but music. The priests who tended these channels spoke of listening to the water, for in its flow they heard messages from the earth. If a channel sang too loudly, something was wrong, an imbalance that needed correction. Harmony, even in hydraulics, was the measure of truth. The Incas extended this science across their empire. At Machu Picchu, nearly 200 fountains cascade down the mountainside, each fed by a single spring captured at the summit. The pressure remains constant from the first fountain to the last, a masterpiece of natural hydraulics achieved without pumps or valves. The flow moves like breath, steady, calm, alive. Archaeologists have discovered that the city's water system was built before the temples, meaning the Incas designed the flow before the form. In other words, they built the city around the water, not the water around the city. It was both infrastructure and theology. To the Inca mind, flowing water represented Kamei, the creative energy of the cosmos in motion. It was life made visible. In ceremonies, priests would pour sacred chicha, maize beer, into the fountains as offerings to Pachamama, allowing it to mingle with the earth's own water before returning to the river. Every drop carried intention, every current, prayer. Even the agricultural terraces, those endless steps carved into mountain flanks, were instruments of this sacred flow. Their design controlled moisture, temperature, and soil fertility with such finesse that each terrace could host a different crop. Archaeologists at Moré, the great circular complex northwest of Cusco, discovered that the temperature difference between its top and bottom levels can reach more than 15 degrees. Each ring functioned as a distinct microclimate, allowing the Incas to simulate the conditions of multiple ecological zones in a single site. It was, in essence, a biological laboratory, one that combined hydraulic management with environmental design. Rainwater collected in the upper terraces percolated downward, maintaining humidity and stability. Nothing flooded, nothing dried. Every drop found its path. This balance reveals a profound truth. The Incas didn't conquer nature, they collaborated with it. They saw themselves not as masters, but as stewards of a living system. Water was not to be controlled, but guided, persuaded through respect and understanding. Even their myths reflect this symbiosis. The god Pariakaka, lord of storms and springs, was said to have taught the first builders how to draw water without angering the mountain. If the canals broke, it was not a failure of design, but a breach of Aini, the sacred reciprocity between people and the world. To repair the channel, the builders performed rituals of apology, offering coca leaves, llama fat, and songs to the earth. Engineering was a dialogue, not domination. Modern hydrologists studying these systems admit that the Inca network remains one of the most efficient ever built in a mountainous region. Many canals still carry water today, their gradients intact, their stones unmoved. When asked how the Incas achieved such endurance, one Quechua elder replied simply, "Because they asked permission first." That statement, poetic as it sounds, hides a principle of deep science: sustainability through resonance. The Incas built in tune with the forces of the landscape, gravitational, geological, and spiritual. They recognized that flow follows form, and form follows energy. In guiding water, they guided life. Standing at Tipón at sunrise, you can see it. The shimmering arcs, the murmuring descent, the play of sunlight on moving water. It feels like the mountain itself is exhaling. This was their genius, to turn gravity into art, hydraulics into prayer. The sacred flow was the purest expression of Inca knowledge, science and soul intertwined, moving together like current and wave. Their channels were not mere infrastructure. They were the veins of a living world, carrying both water and wisdom. But the miracle of Inca science didn't stop at movement. They extended this understanding into the very seed of life, mastering crops and genetics in ways that seem centuries ahead of their time. For as their waters nourished the earth, their hands shaped its future, cultivating plants that would feed generations yet unborn. Seeds of the sun, high in the Andes, where the air is thin and the soil seems lifeless, green life still blooms. Potatoes, maize, quinoa, and countless plants flourish in terraces cut into sheer cliffs, each thriving where logic says nothing should grow. To the Incas, this was not miracle, it was mastery. They were not only architects of stone, they were architects of life itself. For the Incas, agriculture was the highest expression of science. To cultivate the earth was to collaborate with the gods, to decode the laws of balance that governed all things. Each plant was a message from the cosmos, a spark of Kame, the divine energy that animated creation. And the task of the farmer was to understand that message, to guide it, to improve it, not through force, but through harmony. Nowhere is this genius clearer than in their control of altitude. The Andes are a vertical world, climbing from sea level to nearly 20,000 feet in a single sweep. Each altitude brings a new climate, new soil, new rhythm. The Incas turned this diversity into opportunity. They created a living laboratory that stretched from the Pacific coast to the snow peaks, cultivating different species at every level, a biological pyramid where temperature replaced time. In this vertical empire, altitude was evolution. What the modern world calls microclimates, the Incas called zones of the sun. Each crop was matched to its solar strength. Maize in the warm valleys, quinoa in the high plains, potatoes in the cold mist of the Puna. And at the borderlines they experimented, blending the traits of plants to create new hybrids suited to each niche. Their secret was not only observation, but selection. Long before Mendel or Darwin, the Incas practiced systematic genetic improvement. Over centuries, they selected seeds that resisted drought, frost, and disease, crossbreeding varieties through ritualized care. Today, scientists recognize more than 3,000 species of potato native to Peru, a diversity unparalleled anywhere else on Earth. Each one is a data point in an ancient experiment that never stopped. The modern quinoa boom, the global staple of nutrition, traces directly to this same intelligence. Inca farmers bred strains that could grow in saline soils, high altitudes, and even under freezing conditions. They read the land like a scientist reads a lab report. Each terrace, each shadow, each stream a variable in their living equation. At the site of Moray, this science becomes visible. From above, it looks like a giant amphitheater, concentric circles descending into the earth. Yet beneath its beauty lies purpose. The terraces of Moray were an agricultural observatory, a controlled environment where temperature and humidity varied dramatically from top to bottom, as much as 15 degrees 8 degrees difference between levels. By planting different crops on each ring, the Incas simulated multiple ecological zones in one location. They could test which seeds thrived at which altitude, observe how sunlight and moisture affected growth, and refine their cultivation accordingly. It was the world's first agricultural research station, a field laboratory carved from the mountain itself. Archaeobotanists studying Moray have found evidence of crossbred maize, beans, and tubers genetically distinct from their wild ancestors. Some species display traits that modern geneticists would associate with selective breeding. The Incas may not have known the molecular language of DNA, but they understood its melody. They could hear life's rhythm in the shape of a leaf, the color of a stem, the time it took a seed to awaken. Their understanding extended beyond plants. They integrated astronomy into agriculture, timing sowing and harvesting with lunar cycles and solar alignments. When the constellation of the Llama, one of their dark constellations within the Milky Way, appeared in the night sky, it signaled that rains were near. When the Pleiades dimmed, they knew frost was coming. Their calendar was the sky itself, and every seed was sown in accordance with the heavens. But there was also something deeper, something sacred. The Incas did not see agriculture as exploitation of the land, but as conversation. The earth was not a resource. It was a partner. Each planting began with offerings: coca leaves, chicha beer, llama fat, gifts to Pachamama, the living earth mother. Farmers would touch the soil to their foreheads, whispering thanks before breaking ground. To plant without gratitude was unthinkable. To harvest without offering was sacrilege. Their rituals encoded a truth we are only now remembering. Sustainability is not technology, it is relationship. And yet, their results were undeniably scientific. The Inca agricultural system supported an empire of 12 million people without famine, deforestation, or collapse. Their terrace systems prevented erosion, preserved water, and increased arable land by 50%. In the harshest climates, they created abundance. Their storage facilities, or culcos, kept food preserved for years using natural ventilation, a feat of environmental control that modern engineers still study. Even Spanish chroniclers, who so often misunderstood what they saw, were awed. "There is no hunger in these mountains," wrote Garcilaso de la Vega, son of a conquistador and an Inca princess. "The people live as the corn grows, fed by the sun." It was not metaphor. It was biology made sacred. To the Incas, maize, Sarah, was the child of Inti, the sun god. Each grain was a miniature sun, a seed of light transformed into nourishment. During the great solstice festivals, golden corn beer flowed in rivers through Cusco's streets, poured first for the gods, then for the people. It was both communion and celebration of their mastery, a literal feast of solar energy made flesh. Today, geneticists and climate scientists continue to marvel at their legacy. Modern Peru's biodiversity owes its resilience to those ancient experiments. The Incas created crops capable of enduring extremes that threaten agriculture in the 21st century. Their knowledge was not lost. It survived in the hands of Andean farmers who still read the stars before planting, who still call the potato the heart of the earth. When we look at their terraces, we are not just seeing agriculture. We are seeing data, centuries of observation, selection, and reverence encoded in stone and soil. It is as if the mountains themselves became libraries, and each plant a page written in the universal language of life. The seeds of the sun were more than food. They were a message that true science is not cold analysis, but harmony between matter and meaning. And as we follow the path of those seeds through time, we begin to glimpse the outline of an even greater truth, that the Incas' understanding of life's patterns may have stemmed from a deeper mathematical foundation, one they encoded not in plants or stone, but in numbers. For hidden beneath their rituals and architecture lies a silent code, the mathematics of the gods themselves. The mathematics of the gods. When the Spanish first saw the Inca Empire, they saw no books, no written numbers, no ledgers or charts. And yet the empire ran with precision that rivaled any kingdom of Europe. Armies marched on time, harvests arrived in rhythm, and census records tracked millions across vast mountains. They wondered, how could a people without writing control a world of such order? The answer lay not on parchment, but in string. Across the Andes, the Incas and their administrators used an instrument of logic called the quipu, a cord of chords, a weave of color and knot, the nervous system of an empire. To the untrained eye, it looked simple. Threads of cotton or alpaca wool dyed in brilliant colors, hanging like the roots of a tree. But to the quipu keeper, the quipu kamayok, it was language, a database, a formula, a symphony of numbers and meaning. Each knot was a digit, each color a category, each twist a variable. They recorded population counts, tax collections, tribute lists, and harvest yields. But the deeper mystery is this. Many quipus appear to encode more than numbers. Patterns of spacing, color sequencing, and knot direction suggest a grammar, a proto-binary system that could represent not only quantities, but relationships, events, even stories. If true, the quipu was not just an accounting tool. It was a language of mathematics, a medium where numbers became ideas. Archaeologists have uncovered quipus that contain recurring rhythmic patterns, like melodies woven into fiber. When analyzed digitally, these rhythms reveal binary progressions similar to modern computer code, base 2 logic expressed through twist and tension. What the Incas held in their hands 500 years ago may have been the earliest known form of analog information technology. But mathematics in the Andes was not limited to quipus. It was everywhere, hidden in the alignments of temples, the spacing of terraces, the layout of cities. Each number held spiritual significance, reflecting cosmic principles. The number 3 represented the Andean triad, Hanan Pacha, the upper world, K Pacha, the human world, and Uku Pacha, the inner world. The number 4 echoed the Tawantinsuyu, the 4 quarters of the empire, mirroring the cardinal directions and the cyclical nature of time. 7 symbolized completion, the sacred steps from matter to spirit. And 12, the number of lunar cycles, tied the heavens to human rhythm. Their geometry mirrored these relationships. From the circular terraces of Moray to the quadrilateral plazas of Cusco, every design embodied a numerical balance between heaven and earth. The Inca engineers did not calculate abstractly. They measured with meaning. To them, numbers were not symbols of quantity. They were manifestations of quality. Consider the layout of Cusco once more. Its radial design of 41 sequé lines dividing 328 sacred shrines may not be random. Some researchers believe this system encodes a lunar solar calendar of 328 days, corrected by ritual observances to match the solar year. Others see in it a reflection of the Pleiades cycle, a stellar rhythm integrated into civic geometry. In this way, mathematics became the bridge between the measurable and the mystical. Numbers were not human inventions. They were divine fingerprints. Even the word for to count in Quechua, yupai, also means to revere. To count was to honor creation. To calculate was to worship. The Quipucamayok were not bureaucrats. They were mathematicians' priests, trained to translate the pulse of the world into knots and threads. Their task was sacred because it preserved Aini, the cosmic reciprocity between order and chaos. One of the most intriguing mysteries surrounding the quipus is the existence of color chords, alternating patterns of blue, red, and gold that some researchers believe encoded astronomical data. Blue for water, red for the sun, gold for maize, the essential triad of life. The order and length of these color sequences correspond to celestial events, particularly the positions of Venus and the solstices. If true, the quipu was not only a record of the empire, but a record of the sky. In a modern laboratory at Harvard, mathematician Manny Medrano has spent years decoding quipus. His findings reveal a consistent mathematical base 10 structure, but layered atop it are anomalies, variations that cannot be explained by counting alone. They're not just numbers, he says. They're ideas encoded in patterns. They're thinking in fiber. Each knot, then, may represent not only a quantity but a conceptual state, a binary of presence and absence, light and dark, yes and no. The Incas had turned mathematics into philosophy. When we think of ancient math, we picture numbers carved into tablets, written in ink, captured by equations. The Incas took another path. They made it tactile, rhythmic, embodied. Their numbers could be touched, heard, even worn. In ceremonies, priests carried quipus across their shoulders like living scrolls, the knots brushing against their skin, data merging with flesh. Information was not separated from experience, it was woven into it. This may be why their knowledge survived conquest. Though the Spanish burned libraries and broke temples, they could not erase numbers encoded in stone, ratios carved into terraces, or patterns preserved in the memory of farmers and builders. The mathematical order of the Andes endures, invisible but constant, like gravity. Perhaps the greatest proof of their mathematical mind lies not in what they wrote, but in what they built. Machu Picchu's layout follows a grid of ratios that anticipate Euclidean geometry, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 5, the same proportions that govern music and optics. Their architects understood that beauty emerges from proportion, and proportion is the visible face of number. To them, mathematics was not separate from life, it was life, a pattern of repetition and difference, order and chaos, rhythm and rest. Every terrace, every quipu, every temple was a note in a cosmic equation, one that described not the heavens above, but the harmony that binds them to the earth. The Incas did not merely calculate, they participated in the logic of the universe. Their mathematics was meditation, a way to think with the hands, to measure the sacred without diminishing it. But what if those numbers hid even more? Not just quantity, but light itself. Because some scholars believe that the Incas encoded their cosmic mathematics not only in chords or stones, but in light patterns, geometric codes visible only when the sun itself passed through their temples. And if that's true, then perhaps the gods were never abstract at all. They were equations of light, waiting to be seen, encoded in light. In the Andes, light was never just illumination, it was information. Every sunrise was a revelation, every shadow a message. For the Incas, the sun was not only a god to be worshipped, but a tool to be understood. They learned to sculpt light as others might carve stone, to make it speak through walls, windows, and geometry. Their temples were not static structures. They were machines of light. At dawn, beams sliced through narrow apertures, traveling across golden walls and landing precisely upon sacred symbols. At noon, shadows vanished into perfect symmetry. And at sunset, the same beams reversed their paths, resetting the cosmic clock for another day. This precision was not aesthetic, it was mathematical. The Incas had discovered that light could record and communicate knowledge in a language that transcended words, a geometry of illumination. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the Temple of the Sun at Machu Picchu, a curved tower of stone known as the Torreon. Within it lies a carefully carved window that captures the sunrise during the winter solstice. For a few fleeting moments each year, the sun's rays enter the temple and fall directly upon a sculpted stone altar, tracing an exact line along its edge. Then, just as precisely, the light fades, as though someone had switched off a celestial signal. This alignment is so exact that astronomers today use it to verify the solstice itself. But the question remains, how did they design it? How did they map the movement of the sun through three-dimensional space with such perfection, without glass, compass, or written diagram? The answer lies in encoded geometry. Inca architects understood that sunlight could serve as both ruler and pen. By observing the way it moved across surfaces throughout the year, they learned to draw time, to visualize celestial cycles as patterns of light and shadow. Those patterns, once measured, became the blueprints for their temples. The architecture was literally written by the sun. In this way, light itself became a language, a dynamic script that appeared and disappeared according to cosmic rhythm. Each temple was a page, each alignment, a sentence, each beam, a word in the grammar of the gods. The idea that knowledge could be encoded in light is not as far-fetched as it sounds. Modern optics, fiber communication, even data transmission all rely on manipulating light to carry information. The Incas, in their own way, discovered the same principle, that light can reveal, conceal, and calculate. They used it to synchronize temples across vast distances, to track seasons, and perhaps even to preserve sacred proportions that encoded astronomical constants. One example lies in Ollantaytambo, where 6 massive monoliths form a wall that faces east. During the winter solstice, the rising sun projects the silhouette of a nearby mountain onto the temple face, aligning perfectly with carved symbols, including a stepped pattern resembling the Andean cross, the chacana. This cross, with its 12 points and central void, represents the connection between the three worlds, upper, middle, and lower, but it is also a precise geometric diagram. Each arm of the chacana corresponds to spatial directions and solar stations, forming a proportional map of the cosmos. When light strikes it, shadow completes its form, revealing a message only the sun can translate. The same motif appears throughout Inca architecture, at Coricancha, Pisac, and Machu Picchu. The chacana is everywhere, in window layouts, staircases, terraces, even water channels. It was both symbol and equation, expressing the same ratio found in orbital mechanics and musical harmony. To the Incas, this wasn't mysticism, it was structure. The chacana was the bridge between light and matter, the visual key to their entire system of thought. Recent high-resolution scans of Inca sites have uncovered more astonishing correlations. When sunlight falls at certain angles, seemingly random carvings align to form geometric shapes, triangles, spirals, and even complex polygons invisible at other times. These are not accidents of erosion or coincidence. Their consistency across multiple temples suggests intention, a deliberate encoding of knowledge meant to be activated only by celestial light. In other words, the Inca temples were solar processors, physical algorithms running on sunlight. The energy of the sun wasn't just worshipped, it was harnessed as a form of computation. And perhaps even more remarkable is that these same geometries mirror those found in natural structures, from the spirals of galaxies to the growth patterns of plants. The Incas, through intuition or inheritance, recognized that the laws governing light were the same laws that governed life. When they built their temples, they weren't imitating nature, they were expressing it. Some modern researchers studying the distribution of light within Inca chambers have noticed something that deepens the mystery. The sunlight, when reflected off polished stone or gold panels, disperses in specific angular ratios, often corresponding to harmonic intervals in sound. Light and vibration, geometry and tone, all converging in one design. It suggests that the Incas may have pursued a unified science, an understanding that light and sound are two expressions of the same cosmic vibration. To them, the temple was not just architecture, it was resonance made visible. The idea of encoding sacred knowledge in light also extends into their mythology. According to legend, the god Viracocha created the world by speaking light into darkness. From his words came the first dawn. The Incas may have seen themselves as continuators of that act, decoding and retransmitting the original light through their architecture. Each temple, each reflection, each solstice beam was a renewal of creation, a reminder that the universe is written in luminous language. It is possible, then, that the temples of the sun were also archives, not of books or scrolls, but of geometry, proportion, and celestial motion preserved in stone. When the right light struck the right surface, a message appeared, not for the eyes alone, but for the mind to interpret. What we call mystery, they called memory, and perhaps that memory was meant to last forever. For when time erases ink, when languages vanish, light remains. It cannot be burned, only forgotten. The Incas knew this. They built their knowledge not to survive conquest, but to survive time. And through light, it still speaks. From Machu Picchu's towers, from Cusco's stones, from the golden silence of Coricancha, the code endures, waiting for those who still know how to read the sun. But the Incas didn't limit this luminous knowledge to temples alone. Somewhere deep in their mountains, they built centers of experimentation, places where geometry, agriculture, and energy converged, laboratories where they tested the laws of the universe itself. And within those hidden sanctuaries, the line between science and magic completely disappeared. The secret laboratories, hidden in the folds of the Andes, lie places that defy classification. They are not quite temples, not quite cities, not quite farms, and yet they are all of these at once. Stone circles descending into the earth, terraces spiraling like waves, fountains that pulse with eternal motion. Archaeologists call them agricultural centers, but to those who listen closely, they are something far more mysterious. Laboratories of the gods. One of the most haunting stands west of Cusco, Moray, the circular complex of concentric terraces that resemble a green amphitheater. From above, it looks like a vortex, a spiral pulling you inward, toward the heart of the earth. Each ring descends deeper, and with each step, the temperature changes. Warmer at the top, cooler below. To modern scientists, it is an environmental marvel, a 15-degree differential that allows simultaneous cultivation of crops from multiple ecological zones. But to the Inca priest scientists, Moray was not just agriculture, it was experimentation. Here, they tested the behavior of plants under controlled conditions, recording how altitude, humidity, and sunlight shaped their growth. The layout was deliberate. The terrace's shape funneled air and water in predictable flows, creating microclimates. Each level was a data point in a living equation, an experiment in adaptation and balance. When Spanish chroniclers first saw it, they assumed it was a stadium for ceremonies. In a sense, they were right. The ceremony was science. To plant was to pray. To measure growth was to understand the will of the cosmos. But Moray was not alone. Across the Sacred Valley, similar centers echoed its design. At Tipón, terraces and canals weave through the mountainside with surgical precision. Water cascades down from the peaks, dividing into symmetrical streams that maintain constant flow and pressure. The entire complex functions like a hydraulic equation, not simply irrigation, but control of motion itself. Tipón, it seems, was not just for crops, but for energy. Some researchers propose that the site was used to study the physics of flow, not only of water, but of Pachamama's breath, the subtle currents of life moving through the landscape. Then there is Ollantaytambo, the great fortress that faces the rising solstice sun. Beneath its monumental walls lies a network of channels, reservoirs, and temples that appear almost engineered to distribute water, light, and vibration in harmonious proportion. The stones here are carved with minute precision, some showing evidence of acoustic tuning similar to the resonant chambers of Sacsayhuaman. What purpose could such synchronization serve, if not to study, or perhaps utilize, the invisible forces of the world? It is possible that these three sites, Moray, Tipón, and Ollantaytambo, formed the trinity of Inca experimentation: biology, hydraulics, and energy, the three elements of life observed, tested, and mastered. The Amautas, the philosopher-engineers of the empire, were said to travel among these sanctuaries, gathering data through ritual. They measured temperature with touch, humidity with observation, vibration with hearing. To modern eyes, it seems primitive. To them, it was communion. Their senses were their instruments, their memory, their library. Imagine, for a moment, standing in Moray at sunset. The light descends into the terraces like liquid gold, pooling at the center. The air cools, sound deepens, and the stone begins to hum. In that stillness, you sense that this place is more than agricultural. It is acoustical, astronomical, geometrical. Each level corresponds not only to altitude but to frequency. The terraces form a spiral resonator capable of amplifying sound and perhaps energy. If the Incas truly worked with resonance, as their architecture suggests, then Moray may have been more than a garden. It may have been a field laboratory of vibration, a space for testing the relationship between frequency, growth, and form. This possibility gains weight when one considers their world view. To the Incas, everything was alive: stone, water, air, and seed. Each carried Kamak, the animating energy of the universe. Their task as scientists was not to dominate that energy, but to harmonize with it, to find the frequencies at which nature cooperated rather than resisted. This mindset transforms Moray, Tipón, and Ollantaytambo into temples of interaction, places where humans and nature co-created through observation and respect. The evidence for experimentation is everywhere. At Tipón, variations in water channel width suggest deliberate testing of flow rates. At Moray, subtle differences in soil composition between terraces indicate intentional transplantation. They imported earth from distant valleys to observe plant adaptation. At Ollantaytambo, stonework shows multiple construction phases, perhaps reflecting iterative refinement, a process of improvement based on observation. This is the scientific method, centuries before the term existed, and yet their science remained inseparable from spirituality. When the priests conducted experiments, they offered prayers. When they adjusted a canal, they sang to the water. They believed that the universe revealed its secrets only to those who approached it with reverence. The act of study was itself an act of devotion. That, perhaps, was the Incas' greatest insight. That understanding required humility. Their laboratories were sanctuaries, not factories. Their experiments sought harmony, not control. They measured without dissecting, changed without destroying. Some archaeologists now call these sites the Inca universities. But the truth may be even grander. They were cosmic classrooms, where the curriculum was existence itself. Students learned not from books, but from wind, shadow, and seed. The teachers were mountains, rivers, and stars. The subject was life, the method, balance. It's no wonder that when the Spanish conquered the empire, they could not grasp what they saw. To their eyes, these were strange gardens or fortresses. They lacked the vocabulary to describe sacred science. But in those terraces and fountains lies a record more enduring than any text, the physical memory of an intelligence that bridged heaven and earth. And perhaps those priests knew that one day, when the old world's noise had faded, their laboratories would speak again, through the whisper of water, the hum of stone, the silence of geometry. For what they built was not lost, it only sleeps, and beneath that sleep lies one final secret, the greatest of all their mysteries. Because in those laboratories and across their empire, the Incas may have learned to work not just with matter or light, but with energy itself, forces that modern science is only now beginning to understand. And if that is true, then what we call myth may be the residue of a technology far older than our own. Energy, earth, and the unknown. There are places in the Andes where compasses falter, where birds fly in strange circles, and where silence seems to hum. The locals say the mountains breathe there, not metaphorically but literally, exhaling a pulse that can be felt in the bones. Modern science calls them geomagnetic anomalies. The Incas called them huacas, sacred places where the world's invisible energy becomes visible. To the Inca mind, energy was not an abstract concept. It was life itself. Every rock, every stream, every breath of wind carried a current of Kamak, the vital essence flowing through the universe. This current connected all realms, from the depths of the underworld to the peaks that touch the stars. The Incas did not seek to control it. They sought to tune to it, to live within the frequency of the earth. Across their empire, they built temples, canals, and roads that seemed to follow invisible lines, not random geography, but a deliberate geometry of power. Some researchers call these alignments energy lines, others telluric paths, but in Andean cosmology they were known as sequis, lines of life radiating from Cusco, connecting hundreds of sacred sites like nodes in a vast energetic network. It was as if the Incas had mapped the nervous system of the planet. When modern geomagnetic surveys were conducted along several of these ancient paths, something extraordinary emerged. Many of them correspond to areas of higher magnetic flux or seismic conductivity. Coincidence? Or evidence that the Incas, without metal or modern instruments, felt what we measure? They placed their greatest temples at intersections of these currents, places where energy pooled or shifted. Machu Picchu rests on a granite ridge dense with quartz, a crystal known to modern physics for its piezoelectric properties, the ability to generate charge under pressure when sunlight warms those stones by day and the cold air grips them by night. Microcurrents of electricity ripple through the rock. It is subtle, invisible, yet constant. Perhaps the Incas sensed it, the same way one senses the vibration of thunder before it sounds. Their word samakause means breath of life, but it also means pulse of the earth. They believed that mountains, apus, were conscious because they pulsed. Each mountain had a rhythm, and every sacred site was chosen to harmonize with that rhythm. The priests learned these frequencies by feeling, by meditation, by ritual, by sound. To them, resonance was the first form of science. Some modern physicists and archaeo-engineers have proposed that Inca architecture may have amplified or distributed this natural energy. The massive stones, perfectly joined without mortar, could have acted as capacitors, storing the Earth's subtle charge. The trapezoidal windows and doorways, common in every temple, may have concentrated electromagnetic fields. And the presence of water, ever flowing, ever resonating, might have served as a conductor, moving energy through the city like blood through veins. In other words, the Incas could have been working with what we would call geoelectric design. At Sacsayhuaman, the fortress above Cusco, measurements of electromagnetic potential reveal localized variations stronger than surrounding terrain. The site sits atop a granite outcrop filled with iron-rich minerals. Visitors often report a tingling sensation, a buzz in the fingertips when touching the stones. Perhaps it is psychological, or perhaps the stones are still humming with the planet's heartbeat. In Andean myth, the god Illapa ruled lightning and thunder. He was not feared but revered, the divine spark that brought rain, fertility, and knowledge. Priests of Illapa carried staffs tipped with metal and crystal, which they held toward the sky during storms. They claimed to draw the fire of the heavens, an image that sounds mythical until one remembers that lightning is electricity. Did they witness, or perhaps manipulate, natural electrical phenomena? When lightning struck the high mountains, they believed it carried messages from the gods. Those bolts were often followed by rituals at the nearest temple, where water and light were combined in offering. To modern eyes, it seems spiritual. To theirs, it was a circuit completed, sky meeting earth through light and flow. Machu Picchu, perched between two fault lines, seems intentionally located at the confluence of geomagnetic forces. Its temples stand on quartz-rich foundations. Its canals guide water through the rock. Its terraces align with solstitial paths. Each element could act as part of a resonant system, one that channeled both visible and invisible energy. When you stand at the Intihuatana during the solstice and feel that strange, quiet vibration beneath your feet, you are feeling what they once called the living current of the world. Modern geophysicists note that certain Inca sites coincide with strong telluric currents, natural flows of electrical energy caused by the planet's rotation and ionosphere. Could it be that the Incas intuitively built upon these power points, using architecture to interact with the Earth's own electromagnetic field? If so, their temples were not only houses of worship, they were energy nodes in a planetary network. This concept resonates with ancient traditions across the world. The pyramids of Egypt, the megaliths of Stonehenge, the temples of Angkor. Everywhere, early civilizations placed their monuments at places where energy gathered. Perhaps they all tapped into the same forgotten science, a knowledge of the earth as a living, vibrating organism. The Incas were simply its most refined expression, integrating that awareness into every aspect of life. To them, the universe was not divided into physics and faith, but united by flow. Energy in all its forms, electric, magnetic, spiritual, was the language of existence, and they spoke it fluently. But what if this knowledge did not end with the fall of the empire? What if fragments of it survived, encoded not in temples or stones, but in rituals, myths, and oral memory? waiting for rediscovery. Because even today in remote Andean villages, elders still speak of the Earth's song, of places where you can hear the world breathe. Maybe they are not speaking in metaphor. Maybe they are remembering. For if the Incas truly learned to read the pulse of the planet, then they may have held the key to something far greater, a vision of reality where energy, consciousness, and life are one. And in the echo of that forgotten energy, something eternal still vibrates, the same hum that shaped their stones, guided their rivers, and aligned their stars. But this vibration, this unity between science and spirit, was fragile. And when the empire fell, so too did the guardians of its frequency. The temples were silenced, the stones went quiet, and an entire world of knowledge was buried beneath the ashes of conquest. Yet the memory of that world, of that sacred science, still lingers, waiting for the light of remembrance. When science was sacred to the Incas, there was no word for science as we understand it. No boundary-divided experiment from prayer, calculation from ceremony, or the temple from the laboratory. In their world, knowledge itself was sacred, an offering to the universe, a duty to maintain balance between heaven and earth. Every act of observation was a form of worship. Every measurement, a meditation. The Incas lived within a worldview called Aini, reciprocity. Everything that existed, from the smallest grain of sand to the mightiest Apu mountain, participated in a web of mutual giving. If you took from the land, you gave back. If you harvested the light, you honored the darkness. This principle governed their economy, their rituals, and their science. It was the moral equation of the cosmos. The keepers of this equilibrium were the Amautas, philosopher-engineers, teachers, astronomers, and mystics who served as the empire's intellectual heart. They were not priests in the European sense, nor scholars locked in towers. They were wanderers of knowledge, traveling between the empire's temples, laboratories, and observatories, between Machu Picchu's solar stones and Moray's fertile rings, carrying wisdom like living conduits of light. Their education lasted decades. They memorized star patterns, agricultural calendars, proportions of architecture, and the mythic stories that gave these patterns meaning. They were trained to perceive connection, to see how the shape of a leaf mirrored a galaxy, how the rhythm of planting echoed the cycle of the moon. To them, to know something was to love it, and to love it was to serve it. The Sapa Inca, the emperor, stood at the center of this web, not as a despot, but as the son of the sun, the living embodiment of cosmic order. His role was both scientific and spiritual, to ensure that the empire's rhythms remained aligned with those of the heavens. When he stood in the golden chamber of Coricancha and received the first light of the solstice, he was not merely performing ritual, he was calibrating the world's balance, reaffirming that the empire's geometry still resonated with the cosmos. It was governance through geometry, faith through precision. This union between duty and discovery defined their civilization. They observed the stars to guide their planting, but they also prayed to them for harmony. They engineered water channels that never failed, yet poured offerings into them before use. They shaped stones with near-molecular perfection, but always began by asking the mountains permission. For the Incas, morality and physics were one and the same. To break the balance, to exploit without gratitude, to build without purpose, was the greatest sin. They called such imbalance hucha, disorder, dissonance, a spiritual error that rippled through the web of existence. And to restore harmony was not only ethical but energetic, an act of literal repair to the fabric of the world. In this way, their temples were not only places of power but of responsibility. Each was tended by caretakers who read the signs of imbalance, drought, earthquake, celestial anomaly, and answered them through ritual and recalibration. If the sun rose 1 degree off its expected point, the priests realigned mirrors and altars. If the rains faltered, they examined the water channels and the stars simultaneously, for both were expressions of the same principle, flow. This deep intertwining of spirit and structure gave their world extraordinary resilience. It was not fear of gods that maintained order, but respect for law, not human law, but natural law. And those who mastered that law, the Amautas, were revered not because they were powerful, but because they were humble enough to listen. Their humility produced precision. Their reverence produced endurance. Even music and ritual reflected this scientific order. The flutes, drums, and chants of the Inti Raymi, the great festival of the sun, followed precise mathematical rhythms based on lunar cycles and heartbeat tempo. The dance was not entertainment, it was synchronization, the entire empire moving in resonance with celestial time. It's easy to see why, when the Spanish came, they mistook devotion for superstition. They could not conceive of a civilization in which spirit and science were two sides of the same truth. To destroy one, they destroyed both. They burned the temples, silenced the songs, executed the Amautas, and in doing so, they severed the most delicate connection of all, humanity's conscious participation in the living rhythm of the world. But traces of that connection remain. In Andean villages, festivals still mark the solstice with song and offering. Farmers still read the sky before planting, still whisper gratitude before harvest. Children still learn to see the mountain as family, the river as voice, the star as ancestor. The sacred science never truly died. It simply went underground, hidden in myth, ritual, and memory. Because knowledge that is sacred cannot be erased, it only waits for those who remember how to see with both the mind and the heart. Perhaps that is what the Incas meant when they said, "To know is to give light." For them, every discovery was a prayer, every act of understanding, a continuation of creation itself. And when science became sacred, the world itself became intelligent, a conscious, breathing whole that spoke in vibration, color, and proportion. But that harmony would not last forever. When the world of the Incas was shattered by conquest, the silence that followed was more than political. It was the muting of a civilization that once sang in perfect pitch with the universe. And what was lost in that silence may have been the greatest knowledge of all, the great amnesia. When the ships came, they brought more than men. They brought forgetfulness, not the forgetfulness of memory, but of meaning, the slow erasure of a civilization that had once built harmony into the bones of the earth. The Spanish did not understand the world they conquered. They saw the terraces, the temples, the fountains, but not the equations beneath them. To them, the Incas were idolaters, their gold a symbol of greed, their sun worship a sin. They could not imagine that what they were destroying was not superstition, but science, a sacred mathematics of light, water, and time. And so the burning began. In the great temple of Coricancha, where once the first rays of dawn had struck walls of gold, the conquistadors tore away the plates and built a church upon the foundations. The gold melted into coins. The geometry remained. But the priests of Inti were gone, executed or enslaved. Their chants, their measurements, their records tied in knots, all silenced. The Quipus, those living archives of data and philosophy, were declared works of the devil. Thousands were destroyed, burned in plazas as heresy. Only a few hundred survived, scattered across the mountains like fragments of a broken language. With them vanished centuries of observation, the records of tides, stars, crops, and rituals. The empire's memory was cut from its cords. In their place came paper, words written in another tongue, numbers that measured not harmony, but debt. The cosmic balance gave way to commerce. But the great amnesia was not only physical, it was psychological. The Spanish imposed not just new rulers, but a new reality, a world divided between heaven and earth, soul and science, man and nature. The Inca principle of Aini, reciprocity, was replaced by hierarchy. The living world became property, and the earth, once a mother, became an object. It was the death of a world view. In the years that followed, earthquakes struck Cusco, temples fell, cathedrals crumbled, but the Inca foundations remained. Those perfect stones, still locked together, seemed to resist the new order, as if the earth itself refused to forget. Even buried beneath colonial walls, their precision whispered a truth too deep to silence, that the old science still lived in the geometry of the land. In secret, it endured. The Amautas, those philosopher-engineers who had once served the empire, disappeared into the mountains. Some became healers, teachers, or hermits. Others hid their knowledge in rituals, passing it down through songs and symbols disguised as Christian prayers. A festival for the Virgin became an offering to Pachamama. A cross became the chacana, hidden in plain sight. The language of the cosmos survived, translated into myth. In the remote valleys, farmers, still planted by the Pleiades, still poured chicha for the earth before drinking. Children were still taught that mountains have souls, that water listens, that time moves in circles, not lines. The sacred science retreated into the rhythm of life, invisible but unbroken, and yet the amnesia deepened in the wider world. As Europe entered its age of reason, it rediscovered principles the Incas had already lived by: the circulation of energy, the harmony of form, the interdependence of ecosystems. But stripped of spirit, these discoveries became tools of conquest rather than connection. Knowledge divorced from reverence became power without balance. The world learned to measure, but not to listen. The Inca vision, that science and soul are one, faded from history books. Their temples were studied as ruins, their myths dismissed as poetry. Only in recent decades have archaeologists begun to glimpse the sophistication of their systems, the precision of their waterworks, the astronomical genius of their architecture, the logic encoded in their quipus. But even now, academia hesitates to call it science. To do so would mean admitting that modernity did not invent intelligence, that wisdom once lived in stone and ritual, long before telescopes and algorithms. This, perhaps, is the true great amnesia, not the loss of knowledge, but the loss of context. We have the facts, the terraces, the temples, the numbers, but not the philosophy that gave them purpose. We remember how they built, but not why. And yet, every time the sun rises over the Andes, its light falls upon those same stones, tracing the same angles, igniting the same golden glow. The pattern endures, the light still remembers. Somewhere beneath centuries of silence, the Inca science sleeps, waiting for humanity to evolve enough to hear it again. It is not lost. It is only waiting for the right question. Maybe that is why, even now, we return to their ruins, to walk where geometry met soul, to touch walls that pulse with forgotten frequencies. Because deep down we sense that they knew something we have forgotten, something about connection, about purpose, about being alive in a living universe. And so we search, in satellites and soil, in equations and echoes. We search for what they once lived, the knowledge beyond time. But the story does not end in loss, for every amnesia carries the seed of remembrance, and slowly, across the centuries, the world is beginning to awaken, to rediscover that what the Incas called Pachamama, we now call the planet, that the energy they felt beneath their feet, we now measure as magnetism, that the light they worshipped, we now study as physics, and that perhaps they were never wrong, because what they called sacred, we are only now learning to understand. Echoes in modern science. For centuries, the wisdom of the Incas was buried beneath the ruins they left behind, mute, inert, forgotten. Yet, as modern science pushes deeper into the structure of reality, something unexpected happens. The old stones begin to speak again. Equations and algorithms now whisper the same truths that the Amautas once sang in ritual. And suddenly, the line between ancient mystery and modern fact grows thin. The 21st century has given us a strange gift, the ability to measure the invisible. We can now map magnetic fields, record the song of atoms, and see the movement of energy through matter. And in that light, many of the Incas' superstitions begin to look less like myth and more like intuition ahead of its time. Take their understanding of resonance. Physicists now know that vibration lies at the heart of all existence, that every particle, every atom, every planet is a wave of energy oscillating in frequency. String theory suggests that the universe itself is a vast symphony where matter is simply music made slow. The Incas, without equations, said the same. The world is breath, the stone is song. Their architecture, tuned to vibration, may not have been symbolic. It may have been functional, an ancient form of harmonic engineering. Acoustic researchers studying Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo have found that certain chambers amplify frequencies around 110 Hz, a range known to induce meditative and physiological calm in the human brain. The Incas may have used sound to alter consciousness, to synchronize body and environment, long before neuroscience discovered brainwave entrainment. Modern architecture is only now catching up. Engineers use the same principles of resonance and stress distribution to design earthquake-resistant structures, the same trapezoidal walls, the same interlocking systems that the Incas perfected half a millennium ago. When we model Inca walls with computer simulations, they outperform many contemporary designs. They don't resist the earth, they dance with it. In ecology, too, their voice returns. The concept of sumac cauce, beautiful life or good living, is now echoed in global sustainability movements. Their agriculture, once dismissed as primitive terrace farming, is today recognized as a blueprint for climate adaptation. Hydrologists studying Inca canals at Tipón discovered that their water systems regulate flow automatically through gravitational equilibrium, an early example of what modern engineers call self-regulating hydrodynamics. And the terraces of Moray, once thought ornamental, are now understood as climate simulators, environmental test beds centuries ahead of their time. Even their genetic engineering of crops has left a lasting legacy. Modern Peru's food security rests on varieties of potato and maize first bred by Inca scientists, who understood the gene pool through practice rather than theory. Geneticists analyzing ancient plant DNA find evidence of deliberate hybridization, evolutionary intelligence encoded in agriculture long before the discovery of the gene. The Incas did not need microscopes to perceive pattern. They saw through rhythm, not through glass. In astronomy, too, their precision has found vindication. The Intihuatana stones, once thought ritualistic, are now known to mark solar zeniths, with accuracy measured in fractions of degrees. Using satellite imagery, researchers mapped hundreds of Inca structures and discovered consistent alignments with solstitial sunrise and sunset, suggesting a continental network of observation points. Their empire functioned as a living observatory, a civilization designed to see. And even in physics, their worldview finds reflection. The Andean principle that everything is alive, that matter and spirit are one continuum, mirrors the modern concept of quantum entanglement, where all particles remain connected across distance. What the Incas called Kamak, the life force flowing through all things, is strikingly similar to what physicists call the quantum field, an invisible sea of energy vibrating at every point in space. Different language, same truth. What science describes as energy, the Incas described as soul. They knew that when you disturb one part of the world, the whole world responds, an understanding that lies at the foundation of ecology and systems theory. They had no equations for feedback loops or network dynamics, yet they built an empire that embodied them. In many ways, our rediscovery of their wisdom is a return to humility. We are realizing that progress is not always linear, that sometimes, to move forward, we must remember what was left behind. As we face a planet in crisis, the Inca vision of unity, between water and stone, between light and life, feels less like mythology and more like instruction. Their temples remind us that design can be devotion. Their canals remind us that technology can be gentle. Their geometry reminds us that beauty is precision, and precision an act of love. In the laboratories of modern physics, scientists now explore the possibility that consciousness itself is a field, that awareness pervades matter, If that proves true, then the Inca cosmology of a living universe was not a poetic metaphor, but a literal insight into the nature of reality. The cosmos, they would say, is awake. We often speak of ancient civilizations as advanced, but perhaps the word is wrong. They were not advanced, they were aligned. Their brilliance came not from tools or machines, but from the clarity of relationship, the understanding that knowledge without reverence becomes destruction, and that to study the world is to love it. Maybe the future of science lies not in surpassing the ancients, but in listening to them, to read their stones as equations, their terraces as laboratories, their rituals as protocols of balance, to realize that wisdom is not lost, it is encoded in the very systems we are rediscovering. The echoes grow louder, from quantum physics to biomimicry, from renewable energy to sustainable design. The world is circling back to an ancient truth, that everything is connected and that the universe is intelligent through its own harmony. The Incas never wrote that truth down. They built it. And now, centuries later, we are finally learning to read it. But every rediscovery carries a question. If the Incas could unite science and spirit, why can't we? What did they know about being human in a living cosmos that we have yet to remember? Perhaps that remembrance is already beginning, a return of the sun, not of fire, but of understanding. And when that light fully returns, it may reveal not just who they were, but who we still could be. The return of the sun. At dawn, the Andes burn gold once more. The same light that touched Coricancha 500 years ago still travels the same path, unwavering, eternal. It slides across the mountains, falls upon the ruins of Machu Picchu, and kisses the faces of stones carved by hands that understood its rhythm. The empire may have fallen, but the dialogue between light and earth never stopped. The sun has returned, not as a god, but as memory. Every civilization tells a story about the dawn. For the Incas, the sun was more than light. It was consciousness, the eye of creation, the intelligence of life itself. To live in its warmth was to remember that existence is a cycle. Rise, fall, return. And perhaps that is why their world, though shattered, still speaks, because its knowledge was built not for an age, but for eternity. When we look at the world through modern eyes, we see data, particles, frequencies, forces. When they looked, they saw relationship, reciprocity, rhythm, breath. Two visions of the same universe, separated not by time, but by perception. The difference is that they never forgot their place within the equation. Maybe that is what the forgotten science of the Incas was all along. Not technology, but awareness. An understanding that the cosmos is not an object to be studied, but a conversation to be continued. Every river a voice, every mountain a pulse, every sunrise a lesson. Their science was sacred because it remembered that knowledge without humility becomes blindness. We, their distant descendants, now live in a world of brilliance and imbalance. We split the atom but forget the seed. We measure the universe yet lose the rhythm of our own breathing. Our technology extends our reach, but not our wisdom. And so we return to the mountains, to the ruins that refuse to die, seeking in their silence the sound of truth. Perhaps the Incas were not ahead of their time, nor behind it. Perhaps they stood within it, in the perfect center where spirit and matter meet. They built in stone what humanity has been trying to build in thought. Harmony, a civilization tuned to the pulse of the planet, a world that did not conquer, but conversed. As the sun rises over the Andes, we begin to hear the echo of that conversation again. In laboratories, scientists rediscover the vibration that binds all things. In fields, farmers return to terraces once carved by sacred hands. In minds, philosophers remember that knowledge is not power, it is participation. And in hearts, something ancient stirs, the sense that the earth is alive and we are part of her dreaming. The forgotten science is not gone, it has only changed its form. It lives in the equations of physics, in the geometry of architecture, in the rhythm of breath, in the spiral of galaxies. It lives in us, waiting to be recognized. To stand before Machu Picchu at dawn is to stand before yourself. the part of you that still knows how to listen to the world. You feel the light, the stone, the wind, and for one brief, eternal instant, everything aligns. The Inca world awakens within you. The sun rises again, not as a deity, but as understanding, not as a past, but as possibility. For perhaps the greatest secret of the Incas was never how they built, but why. They built to remember. They built to remind the future that the universe is alive and that we are its caretakers. The age of amnesia is ending. The sun, their sun, returns in a new form, the light of awareness. And when that light fully illuminates our world, we may finally see what the Incas saw every morning, that the cosmos is not a mystery to be solved, but a being to be loved. Because the true science is not about control, it is about connection, and perhaps that is how the story ends, not with discovery, but with remembrance. The forgotten science of the Incas was never truly lost. It was simply waiting for the moment when humanity would look up again and, in the golden breath of a new dawn, finally remember.